How are you all doing this morning? You're doing great? Just before I came to Canada, I was a guest speaker in Ethiopia. And I thought it would be nice to share something about Ethiopia so that you may know how privileged you are to live in a first world country. Because there are third world countries, and I think there are a couple of numbers beyond that. And we are really very privileged. And when I visited this country, I was greeted at the airport, and the next day whisked right across the country on roads which you would not consider roads at all. And we have some of the worst roads in South Africa at the moment, which we never had before. But these roads were even worse than those. And a vehicle can disappear into the holes that are on the roads. Really incredible. And we went all the way into the little towns and backwaters of this country. And as I was traveling there and speaking to the people, and I had all these lectures lined up as to what I was going to tell these people, I realized that I'm going to get into trouble here. Because how am I going to communicate scientific data to people who do not have that exposure to the world? How do you talk about the Reformation if people don't know who Luther was? That's a bit tough, isn't it? And so I thought I was a bit out of place, and I thought to myself, Lord, why did you send me here? And the road is horrendous, and the speed that they move upon that road, you would say it is a 5-lane highway going both ways. And the vehicles that are on the road are from about 5 or 6 centuries ago. And they don't wait for you. They just are there. Well, these are the little towns you pass through. This was my hotel. I won't take you inside. I'll show you a little bit of the outside. That was the view to the one side. And there was a fancy construction going on the other side. And I look at the construction and I'm rather puzzled as to how it gets to be there in the first place. Those are the scaffolds. They're all made from planks, and people run around on them as though there is no problem whatsoever. And I think to myself, how is this thing going to hold up to the stresses and strains of taking up concrete and doing all kinds of things? But this is the average house. Now, when you come from your country and you travel around here, you can see that that is quite a culture shock. Not for me. I come from Africa. I know Africa. So, to me, this is nothing strange. These people here are Seventh-day Adventists. And they are so sweet. It's just unbelievable. They welcomed me into their home, and these are now educated people, professors at universities. And in my house, they would live in my country, they would live in a mansion. And here, everything is ultra simple. There'll be a cow in the yard, and a couple of goats, and maybe a donkey. And when you come into the house, you are greeted with a water and a little pail, and they wash your hands for you. And it's very, very intimate and personal, and they are so grateful. There he's all dressed for Sabbath school. Isn't he cute? Yeah, I think he's cute. I wanted to take him home as hand luggage. And this little one, she's having her dessert, which consists of chewing a piece of sugar cane. That's the only dessert you'll basically find there. And this is the church. Can you look at your church? And then look at that church? Electricity, only on occasion. It goes on and it goes off. And then they run around, because I had a computer there and they were excited. They wanted to see these things. And they'd run and go and borrow a generator somewhere, and when they switch the generator on, everything goes off. So they have to run around and get a bigger generator, because the generator they found just runs one light. It's not used to running a projector. And so it was fun. And your concept of time has to be totally different to what it is here. They are event-orientated. It starts when everyone's there, not at some particular time. And here I was in the middle of nowhere, in the really back centers of this country, but the whole country looks like this. The whole country. Doesn't matter where you go. And then they just become more and more and more and more. And there were about eventually 3,000 people packing into this church and around it, and looking through the windows and standing on the outside. And it's a fascinating experience. And then they want one lecture after the other. They're even worse than the Canadians. They don't want to go home. They stay there until late. And they want to hear. They want to know. They are fascinating. If you travel through the roads, that's what you come up against. There is no traffic there of all kinds of fancy vehicles, as you see. That's it. And then travel along that road at about 80 kilometers an hour, and you'll see why I'm gray. That's the average transport that you will find. And I looked at some of these wheels, and they were phenomenal. And the way they turned and the way the axles were distorted, and yet this is their taxi. This was outside another church where I preached, where there were about 4,000 people who attended. Now I want to tell you something about these people. These people are really struggling for their faith. These people have given up the things that are bad for you. They live healthy lifestyles. They will not touch coffee. Most of them are vegetarians. And most of them are persecuted for their faith. It's unbelievable. And even here, there is strife. And this was something new to me. Strife amongst the members of the churches. Because some think that to live a healthy lifestyle is too extreme for the time we live in. And so many of them don't go to churches because they don't feel welcome. And they sit outside, disenfranchised. And the same strife that we have all over the world. And it breaks my heart. And I think, how are we going to do this? How are we going to fix this church of ours? That we can become tolerant towards each other and nice and friendly and loving and all of these things. And right down into the very fourth world experience, the same problems, the same issues that plague our first world are there. Isn't that incredible? And that can only be explained in one way. The same enemy must be busy everywhere on the planet. And you know, the more I traveled through this place, the more I came to a conclusion. I had to modify my lectures, yes, of course. You have to make it understandable for the people. This little cart here had probably all their riches on the back, the goat. So you have 2 donkeys pulling a goat. These are average houses. I'm just shooting as I go along. I didn't see one house that was in any way special. Not one. And this is in the church's yard, and they're baking bread for Sabbath. Isn't that interesting? There they are, pounding away. They were so excited. They were going to bake bread. Here was this guy from Africa. And they were so pleased because I would say, no, they wanted to make everything fancy and different for me. And you could see they were concerned because there is no hotel that they can take you to that's in any way even remotely close to what we're used to. And they were concerned. And you know, I'm used to it. In Africa and Zimbabwe, I used to travel in a car that was more like a crab. It drove sideways. The chassis was so bent that it actually traveled like this on the road. At high speed, mind you. And the holes in the floor are such that you can see everything passing by underneath. And so the best thing that you can do is close your eyes and hope for the best. And I've slept on floors, on hard floors with them. And, you know, I have some great African friends. Dedicated friends. I've never seen people as dedicated as these people. Every single thing they have. They're dressed in rags. Their holes are so big you can put your fist through the holes in their sweaters. And they are dedicated for God. They're driving in cars that you will not believe are capable of even moving. And they do all these things for God. Now this is a dark picture, but this is a weekday. You can see there's no light. There's no such thing there. We'll put on a little light with a generator later when it really gets necessary. This is on the weekday, the people coming to listen to one lecture after another. And their music is totally different. It's Eastern mix, Arabic kind of music. It's not something that the Western ear is attuned to, but they all sing, and they love singing. So I recorded some of it with my little camera, the little that I had, and you can listen to them singing away. It's different, eh? It's very different. Now, some of them are quite modern. And this young man, he made his own musical instrument. And here you can see it. And it's amazing how they play this instrument, because they will pick two tunes at the same time. One with the left hand and one with the right hand. It's not like a guitar with frets or anything like that. It's very monotone. And some of the elders came to me afterwards and said, you must excuse that we even have some of this modern music. Not that I noticed, but They're conservative. They don't like a drum beat in there or anything like that. And they would come and tell me, we're working on the music, we're working on it, we don't want the drum beat. Now, this one was a little bit more modern, so I'll play him for you. And he did a solo. And there he is with his instrument. Strange, totally different to what we're used to. And then on Sabbath day, this little church was way too small to accommodate the crowd. So they will have church outside. This is now their best attire. What a nice man this man was over here. He was one of the translators. They would do 2-3 translations at the same time because they have so many languages, but there are 3 main languages. I mean, in my country, South Africa, we have 11 official languages. 11 official languages, and about 26 others. So you can switch to any one of these and listen to a news channel in Zulu or Xhosa or Tswana or Sotho or any one of those languages. Now, I didn't understand even a bit. I could eat this man up. He was so cute. He was there every single day with his walking stick. He's old. And he wouldn't miss a meeting. Amazing. The dedication and the gentleness and the kindness. You know, at the end of this trip, I realized one thing. We think we are so great in the first world. We think we're so intelligent. We think we're so learned. We have so much knowledge and... You know, how are we going to share this knowledge that we have with people that come from a background which is so deprived? And we say, God, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? You stand rebuked when you're finished with a country like that. You stand absolutely rebuked and you say, Peter, die in me. Die. You shall not call any man. What did Peter say? Unclean or common. There is no such thing. These people are children of God. Hounded, deprived of food, chased around. And there was about 7,000 in 2 towns that came to the meetings. 7,000 of them. And I said to them at the end, you know, God has reserved for himself 7,000 that have not bowed the knee to Baal, and they're all in Ethiopia. So I have a problem going to the other countries and the other cities and saying, you've lost out, the number's full, they're all in Ethiopia, you're in trouble, nothing left for you. I've never met anything quite like this. The way they show gratefulness, the way they treat you, this is around the church. Here's the church, and this is around the church. This is what you see around the church. And there they're harvesting in the road and threshing in the road because that's the only flat area there is. So you have to thresh on the road. So the hay is there. If you have a vehicle, well, you have to go around it. But there is no place to go around it because there's a ditch on that side and something else on this side. And here, in the road, they're threshing sorghum. This is like way past the Middle Ages, isn't it? The techniques they use. And they bash it out, and you can see the sorghum accumulating here on the tarpaulin, and they put it one side, and they put the grain into a bag, and then they thresh it some more. And it reminds you of those old threshing floors. And you can see the biblical picture. You can see it like in Jesus' time. Pick up your bed and walk. Or you can see the picture of Ruth, because if you drive past the fields, I wish I could have taken photographs of some of these things, but everything was at 100 miles an hour. just hanging on. My taxi even had a sticker across the front windows that you could only see the bottom. And you'd have to look like this through the windscreen in order to see anything. It's amazing. This is another transport vehicle, taxi, coming from the front. I was never in one of those, but you'll find them all over the world. In India, they're a little bit more fancy. They're motorized. In some of the towns, they have the motorized ones, but mostly they don't. But look at this. Isn't that incredible? How can one little animal pull that load? And they're all over. Look at that. That's now a good road leading up to one of the largest cities. And then as soon as you're there, it deteriorates. And here is this one little donkey pulling this load. And the thought comes to mind, come unto me, all ye that are weary and heavy laden. And if they don't do this, they won't survive. This is their livelihood. This is a vehicle that was also probably going at 100 miles an hour. And it was not there when we came past, and when we came back it was there. So this happens frequently. There's death and mayhem on the road. It's as though human life is cheap. It's cheap. And here is a man who is fulfilling the biblical picture. Pick up your bed and walk. He's carrying 2 beds. Can you see the holes in the roads over there? Now you imagine traveling through here in a taxi. How fast are you going to go? It's unbelievable. Those are the toys that the kids will use. Something that is a homemade wheelbarrow. And these were sort of the rural houses, the rural huts that they live in. And the whole country is like this. Nowhere do you come to a first world section. The whole country is like this. Well, we moved outside because the church was too small to accommodate the people. There were in the end, probably around about 4,000 people that would attend. Now, you cannot imagine this. This is in the middle of nowhere. And suddenly you have these thousands of people, and they're Seventh-day Adventists or friends of Seventh-day Adventists. And they had a baptism. They baptized 200 people that were ready for baptism. These people are working. These people are working. And some of the churches are very liberal, and then these people aren't welcome. Other churches are less liberal than they are. But how do you get a church in an area? And they love their choir, and the choir is central to everything that they do. Now, look at the roof here. It's tarpaulins put over poles, and here the people stand, and they come to listen. Now, how do they get there? How far did they come? I mean, this is a tiny little town. Where do they come from? They must have come from all the little towns and villages all around. And we had a president in South Africa. He's died recently, and he was a black man. And he used to tell us how he and his grandmother would get dressed for Sabbath in a suit. He had to wear a suit, and his grandmother would wear everything that pertains to reverence and decency on a Sabbath. And then they would get out of their hut and they would walk 12 miles to church, which was a tree. A tree. And he could never understand why he would have to walk 12 miles to go to a tree to go and have worship under a particular tree when there were perfectly good trees right next door to him. But his grandmother said that's where we had church. And on the way, they would pick up an aunt or whatever it is, and they would go to church, and the only ones in the church were the three of them. The mother, or the grandmother, and him. And they had to walk 12 miles to go and sit under the tree. Then one of them would do the Sabbath school, and he was the deacon. He would have to take up the offering under the tree, 12 miles away from his home. And the other one would do the sermon, and then they'd go home every Sabbath, whether he liked it or not. He hated it, he said. It seemed so ridiculous to him. But it molded him and changed him. Eventually, it becomes part of your nature. So I think some of these walked for miles. They don't have vehicles. They must have walked for miles and miles and miles to come to these meetings. And here they had a little pool that they built themselves, as you can see out there, and they were baptizing the people. And let's listen to them singing, and look how many there are. That's totally different to what we are used to. Now that's a very strange sight indeed. What happened was, when I left, when I was about to leave, that was a nightmare. Am I going to leave? Because I had to leave, fly home, throw the things out of my suitcase, fill my suitcase with new things, and get back onto an aeroplane to come here. To go from this to here. That's quite a change, isn't it? That's a culture shock. But on the way back from this last town where I was, where I showed you the meeting, that was about 300 kilometers. And I had a choice to go with a vehicle. There was the taxi, which was pretty crowded, and which had the windscreen covered, remember? And then a vehicle, which was the private vehicle of the man who took me around. What a nice man. What a kind man. Unbelievably kind people. But his vehicle, the tires had no tread on them whatsoever. Zero. With the inside and the wires sticking out. And I said, all right, I'll take the vehicle. Good choice. We ran out of gasoline about 3 towns further, and there was no gasoline. There were 5 filling stations, none of them had gasoline. So he said, well, we'll sleep here tonight. And I said, no, we'll have to make a plan. My plane leaves tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock. I have to be there. I have to be in Addis Ababa. No, we won't make it. There's no gasoline. And I said, A lot of prayer, a lot of stress. Finally, we found one garage that had a few drops. And that brought us to Addis Ababa. But the taxi never made it. It broke down somewhere, everything packed up. So all of those people that were going to come to the airport didn't make it. But before we left, these people who have nothing were so grateful that they said that I am now an honorary Ethiopian. And because my wife arranged it, she was an honorary Ethiopian. And so they had to give us a traditional dress and a traditional blanket. Now this blanket is one that they make them, they weave it themselves, like in the old days. And they folded it up and they wrapped me around there, and they were so excited. And the whole headgear. And they made me promise that I'd dress my wife up in their traditional gear and send them a picture, which I did. So that's what she looks like in the traditional Ethiopian gear, which none of them can really afford themselves. You saw what they dressed like, isn't that so? Here and there you'll see one, if they're really fancy, they walk around like this, but very, very few of them. And the amazing thing is the blanket that they gave us is a traditional wrap-around blanket consisting of 4 panels, each one as long as this entire church. You cannot believe it. It must have been their life savings that went into something like that. And it just breaks your heart. They're incredible. And perhaps we should think again about what we do with our money and what we do to reach these people who are so grateful for the smallest little thing that you can give them. I mean, what I saw there, no eye can describe. You cannot describe it. People with elephantitis. They're just horrendous. People with blindness, cripples, poverty-struck, walking in those streets. And you can't stop and take a picture, it's rude, so you just leave it. But if I could show you that even there, God cares. God wants to bring those people, and He wants to bring them to His kingdom. And He said to us, go into the highways and go into the hedges and bring them. No, He goes further than that. He says, compel them to come in. Because the invitation has gone out to all those that were rich and increased in goods and wealthy, and they didn't want it. They didn't want it. So think about that. And let's see if we can finish this work. Let's develop a spirit of kindness and generosity, and let's put our high-mindedness behind us and say, Lord, where do you want me to go? And if it's in a backwater, so what? Go. You'll come out better for it. You'll come out better for it. And the whole of Africa just about looks like Ethiopia. So can you imagine charging even 50 Canadian cents for a DVD or something like that? Can you imagine it? Where would they get it? They wouldn't have it in the first place. And if they did pay it, they wouldn't have food for the rest of the year. So the first world must help the third and the fourth and the fifth world. Because if God has privileged us, let us help Him to finish the work. Amen.